So, you want to buy a Formula One team, find a factory, hire the engineers, paint the car, show up on Sunday. That's the picture in your head, and for most of this sport's history, that picture was a lie. For decades, owning a Formula One team was one of the fastest ways for a rich person to become a considerably less rich person. Teams folded mid-season, owners walked away with nothing but a logo and a legal bill, and yet today, the cheapest team on the entire grid is worth more than $1.5 billion, and the most valuable one sits somewhere around $6.5 billion. Same sport, same 10 garages, a completely different business. So here's the real question worth sitting with for the next 10 minutes. If this sport was quietly bankrupting its owners for 50 straight years, why is everyone suddenly fighting to get in? Every Formula One team today operates under something called a cost cap, essentially a spending allowance set by the sport's governing body. When the rule was first introduced in 2021, that number sat at $145 million a year. It's been adjusted several times since, and for the current season it has climbed well past $200 million, mostly because new categories of spending have been folded into what counts under the cap, not because teams are suddenly free to spend more. Here's the part almost nobody outside the paddock understands, though. That number is not the team's actual budget. It's the ceiling on one specific slice of the operation: the car design, the race operations, most of the engineering staff. A huge chunk of what a team actually spends every year sits completely outside that number. Driver salaries don't count. The pay for the 3 most senior executives in the building doesn't count. Marketing, hospitality, and the customer engine contracts midfield teams sign with manufacturers like Ferrari or Mercedes. None of that touches the cap. Add all of that back on top of the capped amount, and a genuinely competitive team's real annual spending lands somewhere between $250 and $350 million, and that's before a single point has been scored all season. Why does it cost this much just to exist? Because a Formula One car is not built the way your car was built. There's no assembly line, no factory somewhere stamping out identical parts by the thousand. A single chassis is made up of roughly 5,000 individually designed components, each one modeled first inside a computer, tested against millions of hours of simulated airflow, shaped physically in a wind tunnel, then baked into its final form inside a pressurized oven. Nothing about this car is off the shelf, and that philosophy extends to logistics too, the part nobody thinks about until they see the invoice. Every single race weekend, a team has to move close to 50 tons of equipment somewhere in the world: garages, spare parts, tools, computers, entire mobile workshops, across 20-plus races spanning 5 continents. The parts that actually matter, the ones engineers might urgently need midweek, fly rather than sail, and flying freight at this scale costs a team something like $14 million a year, working out to roughly $400 for every kilogram in the air. Not every team spends at the same scale, even under the identical rule, and this is where the tiers of this business become visible. A leaner outfit runs with a few hundred employees, buys its gearbox and engine directly from a manufacturer, and outsources much of its chassis design, a deliberately trimmed operation built to survive rather than dominate. Compare that to a manufacturer-backed giant employing well over 800 people at a single site, posting turnover approaching $1 billion in a strong year. Same cap, completely different company sitting underneath it, and this is before you even count the cost of the engine itself. Teams that don't build their own have to lease one from a manufacturer instead, a customer engine deal running up to around $16 million a season, a payment that goes out whether the car finishes on the podium or doesn't finish the race at all. It's rent paid every single year for the single most important mechanical component on the entire vehicle. So the costs are enormous, mostly fixed, and largely outside any single driver's control. Which raises the obvious next question: where does all this money actually come from? The first and biggest source is prize money, paid out by the organization running the sport's commercial side. Under the master agreement between the sport and the teams, roughly 45% of total revenue gets funneled back to the 10 constructors every year, a pool worth close to $1.5 billion combined in a recent season. But it isn't split evenly. It's split according to where you finished the year before. The team at the top of that table takes home around 14% of the pool, the team at the bottom around 6%, and translated into real numbers, one single position on that final standings table, moving from 9th to 10th or 4th to 5th, is worth somewhere between $8 and $12 million. Finish one spot lower than expected, and you've just lost enough money to fund an entire department for a year. The second source is sponsorship, and not the small logo on a cyber kind, but full commercial partnerships worth tens of millions a year. Energy drink and technology tie-ups reportedly worth hundreds of millions across multi-year terms. Luxury and energy sector deals sitting in a similar range. These contracts don't swing wildly based on Sunday's result, the way prize money does. The third source is direct funding from a parent car manufacturer, since the racing team doubles as a rolling advertisement and technology laboratory for whichever road car company owns it, a benefit independent teams simply don't have and have to make up for through sponsorship and prize money alone. The fourth source is smaller but genuinely profitable side businesses, renting out wind tunnels and engineering expertise to entirely different industries, consulting work for sailing teams, merchandise, video game licensing, and paddock hospitality packages sold to wealthy fans and corporate guests for extraordinary sums. None of it shows up on race day, but it quietly keeps the lights on, and a smart team isn't just chasing lap time, it's building an income mix, where the shaky, results-dependent slice doesn't sink the whole operation during a rough year. Here's where it gets genuinely strange, though. If every team draws from the same 4 pools, why does the money landing in each bank account look so wildly unequal? For decades, the sport's commercial agreements contained a quiet arrangement having nothing to do with where a team actually finished. One historic constructor has competed in every single season since the championship began in 1950, and to keep that brand's prestige attached to the sport, governing agreements have guaranteed it a flat bonus, reportedly around 5% of the entire prize pool simply for showing up, worth an estimated $63 million in a recent season, on top of whatever it earned through results. Layer another historical bonus tied to past championship success on top of that, and its total payout in one recent season reportedly reached around $278 million, despite finishing 4th on the actual track, while the team that finished first that year took home roughly $166 million. The team that came 4th outearned the team that came first by more than $100 million. Much of this structure was negotiated decades ago by the man who ran the sport's commercial arm for most of its modern history, using private team-by-team deals to keep the biggest names loyal and prevent them breaking away to start a rival series. And even after new American ownership bought the sport in 2017 and tried to flatten these disparities, the legacy payments never fully disappeared. So knowing the money is unequal, knowing some teams are structurally disadvantaged before the season even starts, why would any billionaire willingly buy in? Because for the person writing the check, the team was never really the product, it was the advertisement. A struggling luxury car manufacturer folded its existing Formula One team into its own name after a controlling investment worth roughly £500 million, and every time that car appears on television in front of a global audience, it isn't really selling lap times, it's selling the idea that the brand builds machines capable of surviving at the very edge of engineering, a halo effect that helped push its average selling price toward the equivalent of $230,000 per vehicle. Or take an American machine tool manufacturer that started its own team purely to put its name on a car traveling to Europe, the Middle East, and Asia more than 20 times a year, reaching industrial buyers who'd never see a normal American advertisement. The racing team is a billboard that happens to also race. For sovereign wealth funds and private equity firms circling the sport today, the logic is even simpler: scarcity. There are only 10 seats at this table, and buying an existing team is essentially the only way in, exactly the kind of restricted supply that makes any asset's price climb, the same way people buy real estate in a city that never builds anything new. None of that fully explains the jump from these teams losing tens of millions a year to being worth billions, though. For that, you need one single rule change. Before 2021, there was no cap at all, and the wealthiest manufacturer-backed teams were pouring over $400 million a year into the chase for a tenth of a second, while independent teams tried to survive on a fraction of that, and usually failed, an environment that killed off multiple famous names entirely, one entering administration owing more than £20 million, another collapsing after coming up just $500,000 short of the funds needed to reach winter testing, with hundreds of staff losing their jobs the same week. Then the cost cap arrived, and spending stopped being the thing separating winners from losers, and any growth in revenue started flowing straight to the bottom line instead of being reinvested into an endless spending war. The results were almost immediate, with previously bleeding teams turning consistently profitable, and even a team nearly bought out of bankruptcy for around $200 million, now valued north of $1 billion. Controlling costs, it turned out, was worth more to these businesses than winning ever was. Time to pull it all together and understand what this actually means for anyone considering buying in today. By recent industry valuations, the average Formula One team is worth somewhere around $3.5 billion, an increase of close to 50% in a single year, with the top constructor valued between $6 and $7 billion, and even the weakest financial team on the grid now worth well over $1 billion. A mid-table team in a strong year might spend close to the full amount allowed once every uncapped item is folded back in, against which it collects prize money, sponsorship, and manufacturer support that can add up to a genuine operating profit in the tens of millions, on top of watching its own equity climb by hundreds of millions more. Drop that same team 2 positions in the standings, the kind of swing that can come down to a single stripped wheel nut or an overheated brake duct, and prize money alone can fall by $20 to $30 million, while sponsors quietly decline to renew at the same rate, turning a comfortable profit into a loss of $30 to $40 million almost overnight, without the cost side moving at all. For the first 70 years of this sport's existence, a team's value was tied almost entirely to how good its engineers were and how much money its owner was willing to burn chasing that tenth of a second. Today, the fastest car on the grid is no longer the primary product being sold. The team itself, with its guaranteed seat on a 10-team grid, its global broadcast audience, and its costs locked inside a firm ceiling, has become the asset, and a mid-pack finish inside a profitable, appreciating billion-dollar franchise can be a far better financial outcome than a championship inside a business still bleeding cash to get there.